Nobody in that ballroom knew what was about to happen. All they saw was a girl in a plain dress who wasn't supposed to be there. For those who didn't know her, this was Nova Prescott, the daughter who had almost destroyed the family, the one they'd all been warned about. Her father, Grant Prescott, told her she had no right to be there. Denise, her stepmother, called her a fraud who didn't belong and said she'd lost the right to use the family name, ordering security to remove her. But Nova said she hadn't come for the name. She'd come because the hospital could not open that night without her permission. She told her father to ask who actually owned the machine he was about to unveil, and that he'd find her name on the patents. 30 minutes later, the same father who had ordered his daughter thrown out would be begging her to save his company, and the same guests who had laughed at her would learn that the machine they'd flown in from 4 continents to see belonged completely and legally to her. The daughter the Prescott family had erased would turn out to be the only person on Earth who could decide whether Prescott Health Group lived or died that night. 6 years earlier, Nova Prescott had been the invisible daughter of one of the wealthiest hospital families in Chicago. Her father owned hospitals, labs, and private clinics across 4 states. Then Nova's mother died, and everything changed. Grant remarried quickly, to a woman named Denise, who arrived with a daughter of her own, Peyton. Peyton was polished, funny, and loved cameras. Nova was quiet and read medical journals instead of going to parties. Within a year, the family had quietly decided Nova was the problem. Then a patient file disappeared from Prescott Memorial. Denise called Nova reckless, and Peyton, sniffling on cue, said Nova had been careless with the records room. Grant never once asked Nova what had actually happened. That same week, he sent her away to live with a retired nurse 2 states over, with no inheritance, no apology, and no right to the Prescott name. The family moved on as if she'd never existed. But far from Chicago, in a rented garage with bad heating, Nova had started building something the Prescotts never saw coming. The first year it was just sketches taped to a wall. The second year it was a broken-down robotic arm she bought off a hospital liquidation site for $400, rebuilt twice and burned out once. Nurse June worked double shifts so Nova could stay up nights coding instead of waitressing. By year 3, a small medical device fund in Ohio gave her $40,000 and a folding table at a trade show nobody important attended. A buyer from a hospital chain walked past her table twice before stopping, asking if the device could really be running on something so small. She showed him, and he signed a pilot contract 3 weeks later. By year 5, 3 regional hospitals were quietly running her prototype in low-risk procedures, and nobody in Chicago had noticed the name on the patent filings, because nobody in Chicago was still looking for her. A knock brought Nova back to the present, back into the noise of the ballroom, back into the fact that in 11 minutes she would have to walk past the man who had thrown her notebook in the trash. That night, Prescott Health Group was unveiling its most important project ever. A surgical robot meant to save the company from collapse. Nobody in the ballroom knew it already belonged to Nova, and somehow, impossibly, she had been invited back into the exact room where they had destroyed her name. She arrived by cab while black town cars pulled up around her, unloading guests with security teams and champagne already in hand. Nova wore a plain navy dress and carried an old leather notebook against her chest like armor. A guard stepped in front of her, saying the event was private. She handed him a card with no title and no company logo, just her name. Before he could call anyone, the hospital's new entry scanner activated on its own, a green light swept her face, and access was authorized. The guard stared at the screen as if it had betrayed him. A staff member rushed over, cleared the message, and waved her through without a word. 2 women near the coat check whispered to each other, wondering who she was, noting that the scanner had just cleared her over 3 security guards, and that whoever she was, somebody had forgotten to tell the room. Across the ballroom, Peyton stood under stage lights, laughing for photographers, while Nova slipped along the back wall unnoticed. Grant Prescott stood at the podium mid-speech, saying the company was built on hard work, excellence, and family, and the crowd clapped politely. Then someone near the front whispered Nova's name, and it spread through the room like a spark through dry grass. Grant's eyes found her at the back, and his smile disappeared. He asked what she was doing there, and the room went silent. He said he hadn't invited her to humiliate him. Nova said he had invited her because he needed her signature. A few guests exchanged confused glances. Before Grant could respond, Peyton stepped forward with soft concern, telling Nova this wasn't the time for old grudges and that their father just wanted the night to go well. Then she spotted a stack of blank staff badges on a side table, picked one up, scribbled Nova's name on it, and held it out, suggesting that since Nova was already there, maybe they could find her something small to do, start at the bottom, maybe earn her way back someday. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Nova looked at the badge but didn't take it, saying Peyton still didn't get it. When Peyton asked what she meant, Nova said she wasn't there to be let back in. She set the badge down gently, like she was returning something that had never really been an offer, and said she was there because in about 10 minutes none of them would have a choice. She walked past her sister toward the stage, and something in the way the room shifted around her, a few steps back, a few heads turning, told Peyton the joke had already stopped being funny. The host hurried back to the microphone to save the moment, announcing the reason they were all there. Under the lights stood a tall silver machine, Prescott's new surgical robot, the one meant to save the company. An engineer moved to the control panel as Grant announced the technology would put Prescott Health Group among the best hospitals on Earth. The engineer pressed the start button. Nothing happened. He pressed it again, and a red warning bloomed across the screen, owner authorization required. Whispers rolled through the crowd like wind through wheat, investors exchanged glances, and cameras came up. Peyton stepped forward, smiling too hard, insisting it was just a small technical delay and everything was under control. The engineer leaned toward Grant and said, quietly but not quietly enough, that the machine needed the original developer's handprint before it would start. Grant said that wasn't possible, that they had licensed the system outright and there was no outside developer. The engineer admitted that was what he'd thought too, until about 4 minutes earlier. Grant told him to call the developer. The engineer looked sick. Nova spoke from beside the stage, saying they already had. Every head in the room turned. Peyton laughed sharply, saying Nova couldn't even keep track of one patient file 6 years earlier. Nova didn't answer her. She walked to the machine and placed her palm flat against the scanner. A green light passed over her hand, access was granted, and the machine woke up instantly, lights humming to life. The ballroom went silent in a way that felt like the air had been pulled out of it. The silence didn't last. Peyton insisted this proved nothing, that Nova had probably stolen the access code, maybe hacked it, maybe had someone on the inside. The whispers turned uglier. Nova's face stayed calm, though something moved behind her eyes. Grant didn't defend her. Instead he asked the only question he'd ever asked her, how she'd gotten access to the technology. Nova looked at him for a long moment and said quietly that it was always his first question, never how she survived. The words landed like a slap, and for a second something like shame crossed his face before his pride slammed the door shut again. He told security to get her out. 2 guards started toward her. The ballroom doors opened before they reached her, and an older woman in a sharp gray suit walked in like she owned the floor, because in a lot of ways she did. Every investor in the room recognized her instantly, Dr. Renata Voss, the medical investor half the room had flown in hoping to impress. She looked at Grant and told him that if he touched Nova, the partnership was over that night. The guards stopped as if they'd hit glass. Dr. Voss walked past them, stood beside Nova, and turned to the stage, saying they'd found her and that everyone was ready. Peyton's face went white. Dar. Voss took the microphone and told the room that the surgical system had not been built by Prescott Health Group, but by Nova Prescott through her own company, Nova Med Systems. The room exploded into noise, reporters spun their cameras toward Nova, and Grant stared at his daughter as if seeing a stranger wearing her face. He asked why she hadn't told them. She said she had, 6 years ago, when she'd begged him to read her research and he'd thrown it in the trash. For a moment the noise of the ballroom seemed to disappear completely, and Nova was back outside her father's study door, 17 years old, holding a notebook, waiting for hours for a man who never came out, while Peyton watched from the stairs, smiling. Back in the present, Nova opened the leather notebook she'd carried in that night, full of hand-drawn diagrams and notes in cramped handwriting, the very first sketches of the machine now humming behind her. Grant looked down at the page, and his face changed. He remembered the notebook, and remembered not opening it. Peyton saw the change in his eyes and, for the first time all night, looked afraid. Her voice cracking, she said they were forgetting what Nova had actually done, that a patient had almost died because of her. The whispers turned sharp again, aimed at Nova now, and old pain flickered across her face at the same lie that had cost her a home, a father, and a name. Peyton, wiping her eyes, insisted Nova was smart but dangerous and couldn't be trusted. Nova looked around the ballroom slowly and asked if they wanted the truth now, or the comfortable lie they'd replaced her with. Nobody answered. Nova set her notebook beside the control panel and plugged it into the main screen. A hidden file loaded old security footage from 6 years earlier, showing a much younger Peyton slipping into the hospital records office after hours, opening a cabinet, removing a file, and placing someone else's access card on the desk. Grant stopped breathing. Denise leaned toward Nova and hissed at her to turn it off. Nova didn't move, telling her that she had turned off Nova's whole life for 6 years, and they could watch for 6 minutes. On the screen, teenage Peyton glanced around the empty office, then walked out. The ballroom went silent again, heavier this time. Peyton wasn't finished. Her voice shaking, she claimed the video was fake, that Nova was there to destroy the family out of jealousy. At that moment the machine on stage screamed a warning, red lights flashing across its display, system failure. Engineers scrambled toward the panel. This was the live patient demo every investor in the building had come to see. Someone shouted to shut it down, that it wasn't responding. For exactly 1 second, Peyton smiled, and Nova saw it. She moved fast, scanning the error code line by line. It looked like an ordinary failure at first, until she found a hidden signature buried in the code, deliberate and precise. She recognized it as Peyton's. Her hands went cold as she thought of the technical issues that had delayed her second round of funding 2 years earlier, the pilot hospital that had mysteriously pulled out a week before signing, the buyer who had stopped returning her calls without explanation. At the time she'd told herself it was bad luck. Standing in front of that signature now, she understood it had never been luck at all. Someone had been sabotaging her quietly and expensively from the inside for a long time. A gray-suited investor near the front half rose from his seat, warning that if the system failed in front of them that night, he'd pull his firm's offer before he reached the parking lot. Nova, not looking away from the screen, told him he wouldn't have to. She straightened, looked at the guards by the door, and told them to lock it. Nobody was leaving until she found out who had paid for the sabotage. Nobody moved. She worked the control panel fast while 300 people watched her breathe, stripping out the corrupted code and rebuilding the command by hand. The warning lights died, the machine steadied, and the live demo continued without another hitch. Investors stood and clapped, but Nova didn't smile. She turned back to the screen and pulled up the payment trail behind the attack. The money had moved through Peyton's private account, but the signature that had authorized it belonged to someone else, Denise. More files loaded on their own, as if the notebook had been waiting years to reveal them, showing records of Denise using Prescott Health Group to bury illegal medical contracts for over a decade. Grant turned to his wife slowly, as if his body didn't want to, and said she had done this. Denise lifted her chin and said she had protected the family. Nova corrected her, she had protected the daughter she could control. Denise snapped back that it wasn't fair, and for the first time all night her calm cracked open completely. She said Nova was never going to make it easy for them, that she was always going to be the smart one, the serious one, the one everyone would eventually compare Peyton to. She hadn't invented that, she just made sure it stopped mattering. Nova said quietly that Denise had done that by stealing a file and letting her daughter blame Nova for it, and by having Nova sent 2 states away so she'd stop being a comparison at all. Denise didn't answer, because there wasn't an answer that made it sound like anything other than what it was. Peyton started crying, not performing this time, just crying the way people do when the version of themselves they built collapses in front of an audience. Nova didn't move toward her, and didn't move away either. She just stood still in the wreckage of a room that used to be able to hurt her, and found, almost to her own surprise, that it couldn't anymore. Dar. Voss took the stage one last time and said Nova Med Systems would continue the partnership on one condition, that Nova Prescott take full control of the hospital's innovation division, effective immediately. The board didn't argue. Nobody in the room was in a position to argue about anything anymore. Grant crossed the floor toward his daughter, his pride stripped away, and told her he had been wrong. Nova's eyes filled, but her voice held steady as she told him he had been her father when she needed protecting, and now he was just a man asking for forgiveness. He had nothing to say to that. For the first time in his life, Grant Prescott had no answer ready. Behind him, hotel staff had already started clearing chairs, investors lingered in small clusters, some already on their phones with lawyers, some just watching the Prescott family fall apart in real time as if it were the show they'd paid to see. Dr. Voss caught Nova's eye across the room and gave her a small nod, the kind that meant she wasn't alone in that room anymore, even if it didn't say so out loud. Nova nodded back, picked up her notebook from the control panel, closed it, and walked out the same door she'd walked in through. This time nobody stopped her, and nobody checked a scanner, nobody needed to. Everyone in that ballroom already knew exactly who she was, they had just spent 6 years pretending they didn't. By morning, one headline was everywhere: the daughter they disowned had returned to save $1 billion empire. A reporter caught Nova on the front steps of Prescott Memorial before 9 o'clock, microphone already up, asking if it was true she'd built the technology entirely on her own, with no help from her family. Nova paused on the steps, notebook still tucked under her arm, the same one from 6 years ago, now with a new scuff on the cover from the night before. She said she'd had help, just not from the people the reporter would expect. When asked who, she glanced back toward the hospital entrance, where an older woman in a plain coat was waiting for her by the door, the way she'd been waiting for 6 years. Nova said there had been one person, and the rest she'd built herself. She didn't elaborate further before disappearing through the doors. That afternoon, Nova walked the halls of Prescott Memorial in a dark suit that fit like it had been made for someone who already belonged there. Beside her walked an older woman with soft eyes and tired hands, Nurse June Calloway, the woman who had taken in a 17-year-old with nowhere else to go. Nova took her hand and told her she'd given her a home when they took hers away, that none of this happened without her, thanking her and calling her Mama June, saying everything she'd become had started with her. June pulled her into a hug that smelled like the hospital soap from 6 years earlier, telling her she'd always known she'd rise, even back when she was sleeping on Nova's couch while Nova coded until 3 in the morning. Nova asked, half laughing through tears, if that was really when June had known. June said especially then. Anybody willing to lose that much sleep over something they believed in was always going to end up somewhere like this, she just hadn't known it would take a ballroom full of people to notice. They walked on together, and near the executive elevator Nova passed a desk with the cheap handwritten badge Peyton had offered her the night before, tossed there and forgotten by someone on the cleanup crew. Nova picked it up and looked at her own name in someone else's handwriting. She thought about the version of that night where she'd taken the badge, started at the bottom, and spent years trying to earn her way back into a family that had already decided who she was before she ever opened her mouth. Then she dropped it in the trash, not with anger, but with peace. Down the hall, through a set of glass doors, she caught a glimpse of Peyton sitting alone in a waiting room chair, phone in her lap, not looking at it. For a second their eyes met, and neither of them moved. Then June gently touched Nova's arm, and they kept walking. The elevator doors closed on her reflection, and for the first time in 6 years, the woman looking back didn't look like she was waiting for permission to exist. She looked like someone who had just remembered she never needed it.